Hey Summoners, I hope you're doing well. It's finally time, a new patch has arrived, and because of this, we have a ton of stuff to talk about. My name is Nathan Ng and I'll be your host, running you guys through what's going on for patch 11.21. Aside from the balance changes, we also have tier lists curated by our high elo analysts to go ahead and help you climb. Make sure you hit that sub button so you don't miss out on any crucial content like this, and let's go ahead and start the video. Before talking about balance, there are several new skins to talk about. This patch we have several new dragon skins and they look beautiful. You can tell a lot went into them, and even if you don't plan on buying them, I suggest you take a look. Even the splash art looks great. Lagoon Dragon Kaisa, Tranquility Dragon Karma, Steel Dragon Thresh, Duality Dragon Volibear, and Prestige version of that skin, Dream Dragon Yasuo and Truth Dragon Yasuo are now available. With the skins aside, let's go ahead and run through the balance changes next. The first balance change that we'll be talking about are the systems. We'll begin with the nerfs that talk about Guardian. The shield was reduced by 20 at all ranks, making it a little bit weaker at all stages of the game. With the growing popularity of enchanters, I doubt that this will significantly affect the meta. However, champions like Rakan do end up getting a little bit weaker as a result of this change. Not exactly the sort of champion I expected to see get nerfed. The change that many players will probably agree with on this patch is that Conqueror was nerfed. The depth of force per stack was reduced later into the game, and the buff duration as well. Not only does Conqueror provide less damage, it's harder to maintain the stacks now. The difference between the 4 and 6 second duration is huge, and backing off, kiting, excellent positioning, where all of these can factor in to provide meaningful counterplay against the rune. As always, maxing out the stacks on Conqueror is rewarding, but now players will have to put in a little bit more effort to maintain the stacks during a fight. Next is a nerf to Ravenous Hunter. While it's seen its fair share of nerfs, the matter of fact is that Ravenous Hunter is a versatile rune that is always, at worst, usable. Compared to its competitors, it's by far the most popular and thus have been nerfed as well. The Omni Vamp per stack was slightly lowered this patch. Finally, we have a nerf to the item Gore Drinker. The active damage was changed from 100% total AD to 175% base AD, and the HP regeneration is removed. A new Omni Vamp stat is added, and the Spy passive was also removed. Overall, this significantly lowers the damage the item provides but increases the sustain in teamfights. Omnivamp feels great to have on an item, and while the HP regeneration has been removed, Omnivamp is almost always more relevant during combat. Unfortunately, with the Spy passive being removed, this really takes the clutch factor out of the item, and players that previously built it now will have to play on even footing with their opponents. Trinity Force might finally be the item that fighters pick up moving forward. We also have some system buffs this patch. Like I mentioned, Ravenous Hunter's competitors haven't been picked up nearly as much. The most notable example of this is Ingenious Hunter. The base item haste as well as the item haste per stack was increased this patch. As a result, it's a much more appealing purchase when you have the correct build in mind. The base item haste has gone up significantly, so it's definitely a rune player should begin considering this patch. Next is a simple but effective buff for the health stat rune shard. The max health the rune provides has been increased from 90 to 140, making it significantly more valuable to take. For the greedy players out there who want as much value as they can get, this might be your go-to defensive stat. The final change is for Stridebreaker, which was slightly adjusted this patch. Like Gore Drinker, the active damage was changed. In addition, the item's AD was increased to compensate for the change and make sure its power level is remaining neutral. These changes make the item effect a lot weaker in the late game, but roughly the same early on. However, the bonus 5 AD damage makes the basic attacks as well as abilities slightly stronger than before. These are big system changes, and the meta is likely going to be seeing major shifts this patch as well as the following ones. If you're trying to make that push into the next tier, hit up a coach at ProGuides.com. We have plenty of challenger level players who have been trained to help you improve quickly. Moving forward, let's go ahead and talk about champion balance in the top lane. The first change that we'll mention is for Quinn. She's had her scaling nerfed slightly as a result of the reduced attack speed buff on her W. Although not particularly popular, Quinn is popping off in high elo because of her solid laning and effective roaming. By the end of last patch, she's held just below a 53% win rate, and this nerf should ensure that she remains a lane bully while also lowering her late game potency. Even with this change, we'll leave Quinn in the S tier because her greatest strength lies in her early laning as well as roaming. This patch features yet another buff for Sion. After the last one's flopped, he received a bigger buff to his W shield ratio, which has been increased by 3%. It's a really good early game buff, but an even better late game one when Sion is farmed up with a ridiculous amount of HP to work with. One thing to note is that it's not only a defensive buff. If Sion's shield survives because of this buff, he has more guaranteed damage output as well. And with this buff, we moved Sion up to the A tier. If you guys been watching a lot of pro guides, you'll know that I've been reading a lot of these buffs for Teemo, and I will say the same thing every single time. It's just a grim reminder that they're buffing Teemo. Is there going to be another skin released soon, or what's going on? Honestly, I think the blind duration on Riot has gone up because they can't see how annoying this champion is. His Q's cooldown was reduced and the blind duration was increased, and the missile speed was also increased. With the combination of increased blind duration as well as reduced Q cooldown, Teemo poses a huge threat to enemy marksmen as well as bruisers. In the later stages of the game, with enough ability haste built, he can subject his opponents to a nearly endless blind loop. For as long as he's alive and also in range of his target, Teemo can essentially zone out enemies that rely heavily on basic attacks for damage. We've moved Teemo up to the S tier, but we'll really need to see how he does in high elo. We're just certain that at least in low elo, he deserves his ranking. Our analysts expect big changes this patch, but they can't say for certain how things will play out in the top lane. They moved Fiora down from the OP tier to the S tier as they expect Camille to remain a solid pick moving forward. Set in particular was hit hard by these system changes, and we'll have an updated tier list in our mid-patch update for you. Again, make sure to subscribe so you know when that drops. Our OP pick in the top lane is Camille, followed up by Aurelia, Riven, Mordekaiser, Tahm Kench, Jax, Malphite, Shen, Mundo, Set, Singed, Quinn, Aatrox, Poppy, Darius, Teemo, and Fiora in the S tier. Next is the jungle. While the jungle doesn't feature as many changes, it makes up for it with the quality of them. First is a nerf for Graves. He's been doing absurdly well and has made it clear that he's currently the best jungler in high elo. His damage is here to stay because the only nerf this patch is to his E's armor. It was reduced by 2, but remember, the effect can stack up to 8 times. He potentially has 16% less effective health than before, meaning that close fights can easily swing in his opponent's favor this patch. This is a moderate nerf, but it's likely not enough to move Graves down from the OP tier, so our analysts decided to leave him there. The other thing that we'll be talking about is for Viego. He received damage buffs to help him out after his previous nerfs. His Q's AD ratio was increased, W self-slow lowered, and his ultimate's crit ratio was raised as well. Riot is trying harder and harder to incentivize Viego players to build crit. This is so that he doesn't end up being tanky and oppressive. Making him squishy leaves more room for counterplay and also makes him a better fit for a melee carry archetype. We'll move Viego up to the S tier preemptively, but we'll definitely want to see how he actually performs after this patch. Our OP picks this patch are Graves and Elise. Lee Sin has been moved down with the nerfs to Goredrinker and Conqueror, leaving room for the Spider Queen to dominate. Following up the S tier are Fiddlesticks, Zac, Kindred, Kayn, Kha'Zix, Nocturne, Shinzao, Amumu, Lilia, Echo, Taliyah, Shaco, Talon, Jarvan, Viego, and Lee Sin. Players should be on the lookout for AP junglers like Karthus and Nidalee this patch as well. Anyway, let's talk about the mid lane. The one mid laner players probably want nerfed right now is Akshan. I have good news because that's exactly who was changed this patch. His E was nerfed once again this patch, making him a less potent threat. His burst damage and of course his overall damage output have been reduced with this nerf. Since this ability can reset, it's a potentially huge decrease in damage. However, Akshan remains incredibly mobile and also has his Scoundrel passive available. As a result, we've only moved him down from the OP tier to the S tier this patch, but we'll be keeping an eye on him. With the Conqueror nerfs, we expect to see a big mid lane change as well, as it'll affect some big names like Yasuo, Yone, and even Talon. While Talon was about to be moved up to the OP tier, the system nerfs this patch have definitely cut his success short. Before concluding with the mid lane, let me talk about our question of the day. Which team are you rooting for in the knockout stage at Worlds? I'm cheering for Cloud9 because they're NA's last home. Please win, please. I need a win in my life, you know what I'm saying? Let me know your answers in the comments down below, and let's continue on with the video. The OP mid lane picks this patch are Zed and Vex, followed up with Sylas, Talon, Annie, Kiana, Diana, Ahri, Yone, LeBlanc, Kassadin, Anivia, Katarina, Malzahar, Aurelia, Heimerdinger, Fizz, Yasuo, and Akshan following behind. With the mid lane covered, let's go ahead and go to the bottom lane next. While the last two roles were short, the bottom lane features a decent number of changes. Miss Fortune is the first on the list. As the most popular bot laner in the game, it's no surprise that Riot has decided to target her this patch. If you're an MF player, you're in luck because the nerfs aren't too big. Not as big as her damage. As a powerful laner, Miss Fortune dictates the early game and snowballs heavily, also setting the pace for the mid game. Her mana has been nerfed this patch, meaning that she'll be a little bit less oppressive in lane. However, players who are conservative enough with their mana, and of course those who don't randomly whiff, won't be affected nearly as much by these nerfs. As a result, we'll be leaving her in the OP tier. Surprisingly, Karthus bottom was nerfed as well. I doubt many players knew about this, but our analysts were definitely keeping an eye on him and noted him in our last mid-patch update. In spite of low play rate, he held just below a 54% win rate in last patch, so there's at least some reasoning behind this change. This patch, his ease mana refund has been lowered early on. While this does affect Karthus across all roles, it's most notable in the bottom lane where Karthus gains the least amount of experience. With Q being the first ability that he maxes, players will usually sit on a single point in his E for a decent amount of time. In spite of this change, our analysts believe that Karthus' win rate won't drop by that much, and thus will finally place him in the S tier. There are also buffs this patch. Jinx is the first and her passive total attack speed was increased, her E's cast range was increased, and her ultimate's cooldown was reduced. Passive change is to her total attack speed, not bonus or base attack speed. Because of this, it's actually a huge damage increase when she gets excited. Her Reset factor makes her quite literally an explosive solo queue pick, and I think this was a great place to give her some extra firepower. The buff to her E is a nice but small change. I mean, if I was going up against Jinx, I'd probably be ensnared by her too. Doesn't matter what range her E is. I don't know, is it weird that I kind of like him a little bit crazy? Anyway, the buff to her ultimate is also huge in the early game where it's now only a 75-second cooldown. As a result, we move Jinx up to the S tier. Finally, we have another buff for Xayah. Again and again, Xayah has seen non-stop buffs, and this finally might be the one to end them all. Her movement speed was increased by 5, and her Q's cooldown was reduced by 2 seconds at max rank. Both of these buffs are great. Movement speed is a universally powerful stat, but the reduced Q cooldown is huge. With an ability haste build, her damage is bound to go up significantly this patch, and we moved her up to the A tier because of it. Draven and Yasuo were moved down from the S to the A tier as a result of the Conqueror nerfs, but our analysts will keep an eye out on the bottom lane meta as the patch plays out. Plus, I know some Dravens take Halo Blades anyway. In the OP tier, we have Misfortune and Vayne, followed up by Ashe, Ezreal, Jhin, Samira, Ziggs, Lucian, Karthus, and Jinx in the S tier. With the bottom lane finish, we'll wrap up with the supports. Lux has received several buffs this patch. They all add up, and she's definitely going to come out noticeably stronger this patch because of them. Her attack speed per level was increased, her passive is more functional, her E's damage was increased, and the ultimate's cooldown was reduced early on. AP Lux is going to hit harder than before. I think the buffs to her E is actually the most significant. It's very easy to land, and the base damage was increased, meaning her poke is even more frustrating to deal with than before. Her ultimate shorter cooldown makes it another spammable poke tool, so if you plan on playing her, don't be afraid to ult off every single bind you land, as you'll most certainly have the ability back up by the time you need it again. As a response to this buff, we moved Lux into the A tier. With the Guardian nerfs, Braum and Taric have been moved down to the B tier. They've been on the border, but even a small nerf like this is enough to push both of them down a tier. That covers our support changes, so let's go ahead and run through our top picks. In the OP tier, we have Soraka, Blitzcrank, and Amumu, with Thresh, Morgana, Maokai, Zyra, Nami, Yumi, Lulu, Sona, and Leona in the S tier. And that concludes our patch rundown. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and make sure you let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you expand the description link, you can also join our Discord community, and I'd love to see you guys there. And until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.